This video covers Lassen Volcanic National Park in Northern California with some tips and recommendations for your travels and some of the highlights and features of our trip traveling there with our RV, our 37-foot Jayco Seneca, towing a Jeep. And so we used our Jeep to drive around the park. We'll talk about some of the different features that we saw, hikes that we recommend, and just overall tips and tricks that you might want to know. Also, so you know, we were there the last week in September in the year 2020. This is a great time of year to go because you have fewer crowds than you would have during the summer months, but you're not quite in the off season when they close the road. The main road, the Lassen Volcanic Scenic Byway, Highway 89, will close later in the year as you're approaching the end of fall. And because so many of the great features are really located on both sides of the park, I highly recommend going during the time of year when you can experience the full scenic byway drive and experience all the different parts of the park. So September, great time, off season, fewer crowds. We were in a bit of crowds the day that we went just because it was a free day at the national parks. But in general, this park is not very crowded. It's one of the less visited parks. And so you're likely to be able to go and have a lot of time to yourself and some nice isolation if you head in a bit of the off season. So Lassen Volcanic National Park is in Northern California. So as we zoom in here, you can see it's not too far off from I-5 and north of I-80. In terms of where that's at in location to other national parks, you've got Crater Lake, which is just right up here in Oregon. And then over off to the coast, you have Redwood National Park. And then if you headed further south over here, you could get over to the Yosemite area. And then of course, Kings Canyon and Sequoia down in this area. But we did, for our trip, we came from Redwoods and then we cut across on this 299 and took that over to get to Lassen Volcanic National Park. Some people like to do a whole volcanic trip, and so you can go up to lava beds, you can hit up Crater Lake, and then you can keep going up the Cascade Range and do some of the other volcanoes that you have up here, Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, things like that. So that's another trip that can be done. Or you could do this stretch where you go up to Bend, Oregon and get to see some of this area and then work your way back down here to Lassen. So this is kind of the large scale US map and where Lassen is in location to that. And then let me zoom into the California map. So within Northern California, you can see here, this is I-80 coming in from Reno. If you were in Reno and then you came across up through Susanville and got over to Lassen, that's going to take you about 3 hours. The same is true if you're coming up from Sacramento. So Sacramento is down here, heading up the I-5, and then whether you come in and approach Lassen through the southern end or you come up through the northern part of Lassen, that's about 3 hours as well. It's about an hour from Redding, California, which is really your last big town before you start kind of coming into more mountainous areas right into here, forested, I guess I should say forested areas. There's a little bit of hills and mountains, of course. And then if you are coming from Redwoods, this took us about 4 hours, but we were coming all the way from Crescent City on the northern part. And this stretch along the highway moves pretty slow because you're kind of winding back and forth and you have these big trees and it's just a little bit slow. And then as you're coming up through this stretch, you can definitely do this with an RV. This is fine, but this is mountainous, and so you have some mountain passes and stuff as well. We were dealing with wildfires going on at the same time for our trip. But then we came in from Redding on this Highway 44, and we stayed in Shingletown, and I'll talk more about where we stayed at the end of this. This 44 is totally fine for an RV. You're not going to hit any tunnels or really any switchbacks or anything major or difficult. We then took this 44 out here over to Susanville. You have a little bit of a climb up onto the mountains over here, and I think there's another mountain pass or two that you'll have along this stretch, but it wasn't anything too terrible. You could also come in, if you were heading down this way and you stayed somewhere on the south side, you could be coming up and visiting the park up 89 over here. I would not recommend taking your RV through Highway 89. This is considered the Lassen Volcanic Park byway, scenic byway, and it's really beautiful, and I highly recommend doing the entire drive, and we'll show you that because we did that in our Jeep. But we would not have been able to take our RV. I don't actually know if there's a length limit, but at 37 feet, the switchbacks would have just been too tight, and there's a lot of parts where it just kind of drops off the mountain, and there's a high pass as you're going through that over by Lassen Peak. So definitely not the kind of thing that you want to be in your RV. We did see an RV on it, but it was a Class B, which is a shorter RV, and it was a rental. So I'm not even sure the people that were in it really knew what they were getting into or that they were supposed to be up there. But I highly recommend staying outside of town. I'll show you where we stayed at Shingletown because it was amazing. And then you can just safely visit the park in your towed vehicle, or if you pull a trailer, then with your primary vehicle. So let's get on to seeing parts of the park. Okay, if you can bear with me for one more map, and then I promise I will get to some videos. This is the actual park map for Lassen Volcanic National Park. And you can see here is where Highway 44 is. So as I mentioned, we came in from Shingletown or Redding area. Manzanita Lake is in this northern entrance. And so this is where this entrance station is, and that's where my photos will start. This is also where the campground is at. This is a campground where we actually could have camped, but they don't have any hookups of any sort. We wanted to have some hookups this night, so we decided not to camp here, but large RVs can fit in here, so it is an option. What we went ahead and did though is we really wanted to see Bumpus Hell, so we were coming on a park day that was a free day. There's only 4 days in the year that the parks do the free days, and we happened to be here on one of the free days, which we knew. So we got here early and we went straight to where we wanted to visit. And that means driving this drive, which I believe is about a 30-mile drive from the top all the way down here to the Bumpus trailhead that's down here. And by the time we did the hike and we came out to here, by the time we came back from that, it was about 11 a.m. or so, and the parking lot was entirely packed. And people were trying to park on the road or find other parking lots where they could park and then hike over to here. So depending on the time of year or the day, you may want to hit this up early in your travel so that you can make sure to do this. You can park here at the trailhead, or right here across from Lake Helen. There's a little spot across the road, or you can even park at Lake Helen and then come and catch the trail right over here. So there is a bit of a backup option if you can't get in the parking lot that's right here for the trailhead. Mount Lassen actually erupted as recently as 1915. There were 2 eruptions back to back, kind of a few days apart, that the column of ash went 30,000 feet up into the air. It's just spectacular. Here we're standing at an area where you can overlook and see where the main crater is at. You can see here some wildfire damage as you're continuing on the drive, heading from the north part of Manzanita Lake and continuing on the 30-mile trek. The 30 miles will take you about an hour if you're not doing any stops, and it's not a circular track, so that's a plan for an hour in and then an hour to come back, plus any time that you want to actually do some stops and get some pictures and do any sort of hiking that you want to do. As we continue along this road, we're starting to approach the highest point on the road, which is an elevation of 8,500 feet. And Lassen Peak is actually an elevation of 10,457 feet. They have a trailhead that we're going to come up to here in just a second, and it'll actually take you to a trail where you can hike for 2.5 miles and go up to Lassen Peak. It's not a real easy trail. Mainly just because it's so steep. So it was one that we decided not to do with the kids. We really wanted to focus on Bumpus Hell. And sometimes with kids, you have to kind of pick your hike for the day and stick with just the one hike. So we only did the one hike, but you can see here Lassen Peak in the background there. And we're going to be curving around these roads and come up to the trailhead. You can see why I said it's a little tight if you're taking your RV. I did look into it, and it turns out that there's not a limitation for RV length. So I suppose if you don't mind the windy hills without any guardrails and stuff, then go ahead, you can take your RV. But for us, we decided it was a more enjoyable experience to just be in our towed vehicle and our Jeep. Plus, the problem is that you can't find parking at the different parking spots the parking places for an RV. So they had a couple of spots where you could kind of park along the edge of a parking lot area, but there wasn't necessarily sufficient parking for RVs. On the right here, you see the trailhead and parking lot for Lassen Peak. I should clarify that 2.5 miles is just one way. So you have about a 4.8 mile hike going there and back, and it's considered a high level of difficulty. You can see Lake Helen off to the right there, and we're going to keep continuing on the road, and it comes down and guides along the Lake Helen area where you can get out and hike as well if you want to. It's really beautiful. Plus there's some access at Lake Helen. If you're able to park here, you can actually hop over and get onto the Bumpus Hell trailhead as well from here. Lake Helen also has some picnic table areas, so it's a good spot to stop and have a snack or a bit of a packed picnic lunch. Cool fact, Lassen Peak is a plug dome volcano, and actually Lassen Park has all 4 volcano types, so composite, plug dome, cinder cone, and shield volcano. So it's really neat that it's the only national park you can go to that has all 4 types of volcanoes that you can go see throughout the park. Our most important stop, and so the first stop of our trip, was to go to Bumpus Hell. So we went to the Bumpus trailhead, and this was the parking lot at 8 in the morning, so not very busy at all. But as I mentioned, by the time we got back here about 11 o'clock, it was full, and people were parked out on the main road and trying to find parking all over, or waiting to try to get in here for parking. So if this is some place that you want to see, be sure that you come here early. You're not going to be able to park an RV in here, not anything larger than like a van. So don't plan on bringing your large RV with you. The trail is only about 3 miles round trip, and it's really not that difficult of terrain. You can see here it's pretty flat, not anything really that crazy. And as you approach the hydrothermal area, they actually have a boardwalk for that portion of it. The reason people love coming here to Bumpus Hell is because it's the 16-acre area where there's the most amount of hydrothermal features in the park. There's a couple other places where they have hydrothermal features, but this is the largest collection of those, and you can go out on the boardwalk and get really close to a lot of the different features that you would expect at a cool volcano park. So that was really exciting to see. The reason it has its interesting name is that there was a tour guide, I guess you could call him, that was in the area many years ago, and he used to take people out here to explore and see the area on tours. And while he was on a tour, he stepped on part of the land and it cracked through, and he fell into the scorching hot springs and scalded his legs, burned his legs, and apparently it was horrible pain. I can't imagine how bad that pain is. And so it became known as Bumpus Hell because his last name was Bumpus. So that is the reason it has its interesting name. If you continued the trailhead out from Bumpus Hell, you could continue out to Cold Boiling Lake, and this is a lake where it has these little bit of bubbles to it, where it's just gas bubbles from the hydrothermal system that's kind of coming up and making the lake look like it's boiling. But here you are seeing the main boardwalk area, or we're coming down to the main boardwalk area for the hydrothermal features of Bumpus Hell. In terms of hydrothermal features, they have 3 of the different hydrothermal features here at Bumpus Hell and in Lassen Volcanic. They have the hot springs, which are the pools of the extremely hot water where the different bacteria are there, and they give that different appearance of kind of the bluish pools. You can see a little bit of that in this video. They also have the mud pots, so kind of the boiling places where the mud is bubbling up. And then there's fumaroles, which are the smoking areas. And you can see here quite a few smoking areas. Some of them are almost kind of put into caves, so there's little holes within the mountain, and then the smoke is coming up. Overall, really exciting to see this. It's so cool that you can see all these things and not even have to be at Yellowstone. Of course, Yellowstone has a few more hydrothermal features with the geysers and stuff. We don't have any geysers at this park, but Lassen is a little bit more closer located for a lot of people, especially if you're on the coast and in California. And there's a lot less people here at Lassen Volcanic National Park than Yellowstone, which has always been packed when we go to visit. So you can see we're here on a free day, and there's a couple of people. There's some handful full of people, but not that many people. You can still definitely stand around and enjoy the sights without having a bunch of people next to you. And I can't even remember the last time we were at Yellowstone and had that type of experience. So certainly if you care about trying to see some of these volcanic features, you're going to be in the area, put Lassen on your list, stop here, and you'll get to see a lot of that really cool stuff without all the crowds. One thing I wanted to mention is that Lassen has a podcast that goes through and does an audio tour for you for different stops along the park. So I can't remember, I think there's maybe about 16 different stops along the park, and then each one of them has a 1 to 2 minute podcast that will tell you about that stop. You will want to make sure that you download this podcast and you have it actually fully downloaded to your phone before you come to Lassen, because there is no cell service up here, and really for quite a distance away from the park you won't have any cell service. So be sure that if you're going to do that, you download that ahead of time so that you have those audio podcasts to listen to as you're making it to the different stops. We were able to get one of the visitors guides when we first came into Lassen. Even though they didn't have the ranger stations open, they had some of these sitting outside, and they talked through a bunch of the items. I guess you can even purchase a printed guide in the visitor centers during the time of years when you can get into the visitor center and it's not closed due to COVID.
You can see there are.
After leaving Bumpass Hell, we headed further south, going to the southwest entrance, and stopped here for a bit at Emerald Lake. You can see here the beautiful blue of Emerald Lake. Great place to stop if you want to have a little peaceful break, enjoy a snack. And then further along here is the Sulphur Works. So this is what the Sulphur Works look like. You can see that boiling mud. Super cool. You can actually stand here from the side of the road and look down, and you can see that off in the distance there, where everybody's standing around the edge there and looking down at the Sulphur Works and some of the hydrothermal features here on the southwest entrance and in the south part of the park. This location is Kings Creek Meadows, where you can see the Kings Creek going through. And then from this point, you can actually jump up to the trailhead and hike for a 3-mile hike and go up to Kings Creek Falls. We did not do that because we already pretty much exhausted our hiking for the day. And then as we're heading back, you can see some more of kind of the burn scar area, and we're heading back up to devastated area. After the eruptions in 1914 and 1915, and the lahars just really covered this area in mud and rock and other volcanic debris, there wasn't anything here for many years, and so they called this devastated area. Now you can see there's quite a few trees that have really popped up and started growing, but there are a lot of rocks. You can hike around and see that area, and you can see the side of the mountain where the crater kind of blew off. This area doesn't have its own parking area, but it does have a pull-off that's on the side of the road. So you would be able to pull your car over and take some pictures, see the area. You'd even be able to actually pull an RV or an RV that's towing in this space, assuming that there's not other people here parked already. Manzanita Lake is our last stop here. It's a really great spot where you can camp. They have a boat launch area. You can kayak and canoe here. They even have a museum that's located pretty close to here, but it was closed this year because of COVID. But really a nice place to recreate and just be able to relax and enjoy the beautiful forest and seeing Mount Lassen out in the background. And here's just a quick video showing a little bit of the Junior Ranger Packet book that they have. And the kids can take those and then mail it in and get the badge later during COVID. We stayed at the Mount Lassen Shingletown KOA, which was really phenomenal. You can see our site here. It was just huge and gorgeous, big patio, wooded area, tons of amenities. We actually have a whole video that just covers this KOA, and we would have loved to have stayed here many nights. It was really a spectacular place to stay. Not much for Wi-Fi or cell service, but that's really the area in general, so I can't hold it against them too much. But great place to stay, so if you want full amenities, hookups and things like that, this is the place to stay for your Lassen trip. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and it helps you in planning your trip to Lassen Volcanic National Park. Please feel free to like, you can subscribe. We have other national park videos along with other things with RV travel and campgrounds, stays like that, traveling with an RV and having a motorhome. You can also find us on Instagram and at Facebook at RV Homeschool. Thank you so much for watching. Happy travels.